There is a particular kind of terror we feel when a person vanishes. We are haunted by the empty space they leave behind, by the questions that echo in the silence. A person who was simply living their life, present and real, who then walks out of frame and ceases to be. It's a story that unravels our sense of safety, leaving only a cold, chilling void. But what if the opposite were true? What if, instead of a person vanishing from the world, a fully grown, living, breathing person, simply appeared? What if a man, with no past, no history, no memory of the sun or of a human face, was found standing in the middle of a busy city square as if he had been conjured from nothing, from the deepest, darkest cellar of the human imagination? This is not a work of fiction. This is not a legend whispered around a fire. This is the story of Kaspar Hauser, and it is perhaps the most profound and terrifying unsolved mystery of human identity that has ever been recorded. It began on Whit Monday, May 26, 1828. The city was Nuremberg, in the Kingdom of Bavaria. In a public square known as the Unschlittplatz, or Tallow Square, a shoemaker named Weichmann noticed a figure, a teenage boy of about 16, standing strangely. He was attempting to walk but staggered, his gait unstable and painful, as if his legs were not accustomed to their own function. He was dressed in rough, ill-fitting peasant's clothes, but his hands were soft, his feet uncalloused, showing no sign of the labor his attire suggested. When the shoemaker approached him, the boy mumbled. He could speak only a few, broken, endlessly repeated phrases. "I don't know," and "I want to be a cavalryman, as my father was." He clutched a letter in his hand, sealed and addressed. The addressee was a man named Captain von Wessenig, the commander of the 4th Squadron of the 6th Cavalry Regiment, stationed in Nuremberg. The shoemaker, perplexed, guided the boy to the captain's home. When the captain was finally located, he was presented with the letter and the human enigma who had delivered it. The captain read the note, and the mystery only deepened. The letter, postmarked from the Bavarian border, was purportedly written by a poor day laborer. The anonymous author claimed that the boy, Kaspar, had been left in his custody as an infant on October 7, 1812. He wrote that he had raised the child in secret, teaching him to read, write, and understand the Christian faith, but had never allowed him to take a single step out of the house. The letter concluded with a simple, chilling request. The captain should either take the boy in and make him a soldier, or he should hang him. Tucked inside this letter was a second, smaller, and much older note. This one claimed to be from Kaspar's mother. It identified the boy as Kaspar, stated his date of birth as April 30th, 1812, and claimed his father, a cavalryman of the 6th Regiment, was dead. It was a breadcrumb trail that led in two opposite directions at once. Captain von Wessenig, a military man, had no idea what to do. The boy could barely speak, was terrified of the city's sounds, and appeared to be in a state of profound confusion. He was handed over to the local police. In the city jail tower, the authorities tried to question him. It was an exercise in futility. He would only repeat his few phrases, "I want to be a cavalryman," and "don't know." He could write one name and one name only, Kaspar Hauser. The police were baffled. His physical condition was as strange as his letter. He violently rejected all food and drink offered to him, save for dry black bread and water. The very sight of meat or the smell of beer made him physically ill. His senses were overwhelming. A nearby church bell would send him into convulsions of pain, and he could reportedly see in the dark like a cat. Doctors who examined him noted that he had soft hands and feet, suggesting he had not done any hard work or much walking. He was, in every measurable way, a blank slate. A man who had just begun to exist on the afternoon of May 26th. This story, the appearance of a wild child in the middle of an enlightened 19th century city, did not stay quiet. It exploded. Within weeks, Kaspar Hauser was the most famous person in Europe. He was the child of Europe, a living embodiment of Romantic-era questions about human nature, a test case for philosophers of education, and a magnet for the curious, the charitable, and the deeply suspicious. To understand the sheer impossibility of Kaspar Hauser, one must first understand the world he stumbled into. The Nuremberg of 1828 was not some lawless frontier. It was a modern, ordered, bureaucratic state. This was post-Napoleonic Germany, a society obsessed with records, lineage, and social placement. A person did not simply appear. The existence of Kaspar Hauser was a failure of the system, a crack in the logical foundation of their society. The city, feeling a mix of pity and civic duty, placed him in the care of a respected schoolmaster and philosopher, Georg Friedrich Daumer. It was here, in Daumer's home, that the true, haunting contours of Kaspar's past began to take shape. As Daumer patiently taught him to speak, read, and write, Kaspar's mind, like a locked room finally opened to the light, began to release its memories, and those memories were horrific. Kaspar described a single, consistent story. His entire conscious life, he claimed, had been spent in a dark cell, perhaps 2 meters long and 1 meter wide. He could never stand up. He slept on a straw pallet. His only companions were 2 small wooden horses, which he had carried with him to Nuremberg. He had no concept of time, of day or night, of the world outside. He never saw the face of his keeper. Food, always just bread and water, would appear by his pallet while he slept. Shortly before his release, he said, this unseen man began to visit him. The man, whose face was always hidden, would teach him to write his name, Kaspar Hauser. He taught him the few phrases about being a cavalryman. And then one day, the man carried him out, his legs atrophied from disuse, unable to support him, dressed him in the strange clothes, and led him toward the lights of Nuremberg before vanishing. This account of a human being kept like an animal in a box for 16 years was the core of his legend. Daumer and others observed his behavior, which seemed to confirm it. He was fascinated by color, fire, and mirrors, but terrified of shadows and loud noises. His intellectual progress was astonishing. In a matter of months, the near-mute had become an articulate, intelligent, and sensitive young man. He learned to draw, to play chess, to write his own autobiography. But with this new intellect came new dangers. He was not just a curiosity, he was a problem. And someone, it seemed, wanted that problem to disappear. The first attempt came on October 17, 1829, while he was still living with Daumer. Kaspar was found in the cellar of the house, bleeding from a clean slice across his forehead. When he regained his composure, he told a terrifying story. A large man, his face concealed by a black hood or mask, had attacked him, whispering the words, "You still have to die." The attack was real. The wound was documented, but it was also superficial. The city was thrown into a panic, his supporters were outraged, and his protectors increased his security. But a seed of doubt had been planted. Skeptics noted that Kaspar was in a locked house at the time. The wound, they observed, was not deep and could, just possibly, have been self-inflicted. Was this a desperate cry for attention from a boy who feared his fame was fading? Or was it the clumsy work of a hired assassin? The incident convinced many that Kaspar was in mortal danger. His case was championed by one of the most respected legal minds in Germany, Paul Johann Anselm Ritter von Feuerbach, the president of the Bavarian Court of Appeal. Feuerbach studied the case, interviewed Kaspar, and became utterly convinced that the boy was no fraud. He was also convinced that such a bizarre and expensive crime, 16 years of imprisonment followed by a clumsy release, could not be the work of a lone lunatic. The motive, Feuerbach concluded, had to be dynastic. It had to be political. This was the birth of the most explosive theory of all, that Kaspar Hauser was in fact the hereditary prince of Baden. This is not a theory to be dismissed lightly. It became the central obsession of Feuerbach and the shadow that hung over the rest of Kaspar's life. The story, as pieced together, went like this. On September 29, 1812, a healthy son was born to Grand Duke Karl of Baden and his wife, Stephanie de Beauharnais, the adopted daughter of Napoleon Bonaparte. This son was the heir to the throne. But there were others in the line of succession. Grand Duke Karl's morganatic uncle, an uncle from an unequal marriage, was Ludwig of Baden. Ludwig and his ambitious political ally, the Countess von Hochberg, supposedly coveted the throne for their own line. The theory holds that the conspirators acted swiftly. They kidnapped the healthy, newborn prince and substituted him with a dying infant from a common family. This false prince was then presented to the court, where it obligingly died a few days later, on October 16, 1812. The official cause was a common infant ailment. The real prince, meanwhile, was spirited away and given to a subordinate to be kept in total isolation, his identity erased from the world. This prisoner was Kaspar Hauser. The evidence for this claim was and remains entirely circumstantial, but the coincidences are deeply unsettling. The date on one of the letters found with Kaspar, October 1812, is the exact same month the Prince of Baden died. Feuerbach and others noted that Kaspar bore a striking, undeniable resemblance to portraits of the Baden family, particularly to Grand Duke Karl. Most importantly, this theory provided a motive. The first attack in 1829 and the subsequent threats were no longer random. They were the actions of the conspirators, now terrified that their secret, who had learned to read and write and was being celebrated by Europe's elite, was on the verge of being recognized. But a strong counter-argument has always existed. If the conspirators had gone to such lengths to hide him for 16 years, why release him at all? Why dress him as a peasant and dump him in Nuremberg with a cryptic note? It makes no political sense. Furthermore, the entire case rests on rumor, facial resemblances, and the dates on a letter that could easily be a forgery. The Baden family, for their part, never acknowledged the theory, though the Countess von Hochberg was reportedly indisposed for weeks after the rumors began to circulate. The debate brought Kaspar new and more powerful patrons. A British nobleman, Lord Philip Henry Stanhope, the 4th Earl Stanhope, became fascinated by the case. He effectively adopted Kaspar, spending a vast fortune to try to uncover his origins. In 1831, Stanhope moved Kaspar to the town of Ansbach, placing him in the care of a new guardian, a strict and skeptical schoolmaster named Johann Georg Meyer. This move would be his last. Lord Stanhope's relationship with Kaspar was complex. He, too, began to develop doubts. He tested Kaspar's memory, even taking him on a trip to Hungary, which Kaspar claimed to vaguely remember, only for Stanhope to conclude the boy was fabricating new memories to please him. By 1833, Stanhope's letters reveal he was convinced Kaspar was a talented but pathological liar. He was preparing to abandon his child of Europe. Kaspar, under the cold watch of Meyer, was more isolated than ever, and perhaps more desperate. The end came on December 14, 1833. It was a cold winter afternoon in Ansbach. Kaspar returned home, staggering, clutching his left side. He managed to direct his guardian Meyer to the Hofgarten, the public court garden. There, he gasped, a man had approached him. The man had promised to finally give him information about his mother and his origins. According to Kaspar, the man lured him to a secluded spot, handed him a small purple silk purse, and as Kaspar looked inside, the man stabbed him. Kaspar stumbled back to his home and collapsed. A search of the Hofgarten revealed the purse. Inside was a note written in Spiegelschrift, or mirror writing. The message was as cryptic as his first letter. Hauser will be able to tell you quite precisely how I look and from where I am. To save Hauser the trouble, I want to tell you myself from where I come. I come from the Bavarian border, on the river. It was signed with a jumble of initials. This time, the wound was not superficial. The assassin's blade had penetrated his lung and liver. For 3 days, Kaspar Hauser lingered in agony, his old mentor Daumer rushing to his side. He died on December 17, 1833. He was 21 years old. His death solved nothing. It only split the world into two fiercely opposed camps. The first camp believes he was assassinated. They point to the fatal wound, the culmination of the Baden conspiracy. Anselm von Feuerbach, who died, some say of a broken heart, or perhaps even poison, just months before Kaspar, was vindicated in their eyes. The assassins, fearing Lord Stanhope's investigation was getting too close, or perhaps fearing Kaspar himself would soon reclaim his title, had silenced him forever. The mirror text note was a planted diversion, a clumsy attempt to cast blame. The second camp, which included his guardian Meyer and his former patron Stanhope, believes his death was a tragic, fatal miscalculation. They argue that Kaspar Hauser died by his own hand. They see a young man, trapped in a lie he could no longer maintain, about to be abandoned by his wealthy patron. To regain sympathy, he planned another attack, just like the one in 1829. He bought the purple purse himself. He wrote the mirror text note. He went to the Hofgarten alone and intended to give himself another superficial, dramatic wound. But this time, in the cold fumbling with the blade, his hand slipped. The wound went too deep. His death was a suicide, accidental and pathetic. The assassination of Kaspar Hauser did not end the mystery. It perfected it. It sealed his story in tragedy, leaving a permanent, unanswerable question mark hanging over 19th century Europe. Was he the Prince of Baden, a victim of the most calculating and cruel political crime of the century, hunted and finally silenced by the agents of a guilty royal house? Or was he the 19th century's greatest imposter, a brilliant pathological liar who fabricated a story of darkness, who faked his own first attack, and who, in a final, desperate bid for relevance, accidentally killed himself? For over 150 years, the world was split. To believe in Kaspar was to believe in a fairy tale, dark and monstrous. To disbelieve was to accept a different kind of darkness, the kind that lives in the manipulative heart of a single man. The mystery was one of history, of psychology, of faith. And then came our time, the age of genetics. In 1996, the German magazine Der Spiegel obtained a blood-stained sample from a pair of trousers believed to be Kaspar's. They conducted a mitochondrial DNA test, comparing it to living female line descendants of Stephanie de Beauharnais. The result? No match. The case was closed, Der Spiegel announced. Kaspar Hauser was an imposter. But the story does not end there. In 2002, a separate team from the University of Münster acquired different and arguably better preserved genetic samples, sweat from a hatband and cells from his trousers. They too ran a mitochondrial DNA test against the same two living descendants. Their result? The sequences were not a perfect match, but they were not a mismatch either. They were extremely close, differing by only a single mutation. The scientists concluded that while it was not positive proof, the results were not in contradiction to the theory that Kaspar was the missing prince. The genetic tests, like the letters found in 1828, had only deepened the ambiguity. The science, which was supposed to provide the final answer, had failed. The science, like his life, is a perfect contradiction. One test says no, one test says yes. The samples are old, they are degraded, they are disputed. The very evidence meant to solve the riddle has simply become the riddle. And so, he remains. Not a prince and not a fraud, but something more. A permanent ghost. Kaspar Hauser remains frozen in that square in Nuremberg, a young man who appeared from nowhere. His monument in Ansbach bears a simple, profound inscription. Here a mysterious man was killed in a mysterious way. He is a human question mark. We will never know if he was a prince, deprived of his throne, or a brilliant tragic liar, deprived of an identity. The trail goes cold, the files are dust, and all we are left with is the unsettling silence that surrounds a life that began and ended in a perfect shadow.